You're sitting there staring at your 401k balance. Maybe it's $240,000. Maybe it's $290,000. Either way, it doesn't look like $1 million. And that number, $1 million, has been floating in your head for years, like some kind of finish line you're never quite going to cross. So you do what a lot of people do. You open YouTube. You type in something like retire on less. And sure enough, some guy with a nice background and a calm voice tells you, don't worry, millions of Americans are living a perfectly good retirement on $2,500 a month. You feel your shoulders drop. That number, $2,500, suddenly feels reachable. It matches what you've been quietly calculating in your head. It matches your Social Security estimate, plus a little from savings. It makes the whole thing feel possible. And that relief, that exhale, I get it. I've seen it happen over and over. But here's what those videos don't mention. The $2,500 budget isn't wrong, exactly. The math works for two people under one specific set of circumstances. What they're not telling you is that the plan carries a hidden timer, a tripwire buried in the fine print of how Social Security actually pays out. And if that tripwire goes off at the wrong moment, which it almost always does, the person left behind doesn't land in a tight budget. They land in a deficit. They're right that you don't need $1 million, but they're hiding something dark about that $2,500 number. A mathematical trap that ends the day one of you is no longer here. That's what this video is about. If that sounds like a conversation worth having, stay with me. You've seen it everywhere. You need at least $1 million to retire comfortably. Sometimes it's $1,200,000. Sometimes $1,500,000. The number shifts depending on who's talking, but the message stays the same. Whatever you have right now, it probably isn't enough. So where did this number come from? It didn't come from a study of how retirees actually live. It came from an industry that gets paid based on how much money you keep inside their system. Here's the basic structure. Fidelity, Vanguard, your brokerage firm, most of them charge what's called an AUM fee, assets under management, typically somewhere around 0.5% to 1% per year. On a $500,000 portfolio, that's $2,500 to $5,000 a year going to them. On a $1 million portfolio, that doubles. The more you accumulate and leave in their accounts, the more they earn every single year. That's not a conspiracy. That's just an incentive structure. And incentive structures shape the advice people give, whether they realize it or not. So when financial media keeps repeating, you need $1 million, they're not lying to you outright. They're just giving you advice that happens to align perfectly with their revenue model. The goalpost keeps moving because a nervous investor is a loyal investor. Now, here's the part that cuts through the noise. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, one of the most comprehensive looks at American household wealth, shows that the median retirement savings for Americans between 65 and 74 years old sits around $200,000. Not $1 million, not even close. If the $1 million rule were actually required to avoid financial ruin, we'd be watching tens of millions of older Americans collapse into poverty right now. We're not seeing that, which tells you something important. The math of retirement is more forgiving than the industry wants you to believe. Most people, with the right structure, need significantly less than they've been told. I've watched people delay retirement by 3, 4, sometimes 5 extra years chasing a number they were told was the minimum, spending their healthiest years at a desk, convinced they were still behind. Some of them made it to the finish line. Some of them ran out of health before they ran out of reasons to stop working. That's the real cost of the $1,000,000 myth. Not just money, time. The people who retired earlier and lived well didn't have more savings. They had a clearer picture of what retirement actually costs and what automatically stops costing money the day you stop working. Because there's a category of expenses that quietly bleeds your paycheck every month right now. Expenses that vanish completely the moment you leave your job. Nobody talks about it much, but it changes the math in a significant way. It has a name. Call it the work tax. And once you see it, the gap between what you earn now and what you actually need in retirement starts to look a lot smaller than you thought. Let's start with something most retirement calculators never ask you. How much does it actually cost you to go to work? Not your salary, not your savings rate. The money that walks out the door every month just so you can show up, look the part, and stay in the game. Think through a regular work week. There's the commute, gas, tolls, parking, or transit passes. Lunch out 3 or 4 times because you don't have time to pack. The work wardrobe that needs rotating and dry cleaning. The coffee runs. The after-work drinks you felt obligated to join. None of these feel large on their own, but they add up to somewhere between $400 and $800 a month for a typical working professional. Some people, when they actually sit down and count, find it's closer to $1,000. Then there's the bigger one that almost nobody factors in correctly, FICA taxes. Right now, 7.65% of every paycheck you earn goes directly to Social Security and Medicare, automatically before you see it. On a $75,000 salary, that's roughly $5,700 a year, gone. The day you retire, that stops, completely. So when someone says, I need to replace my $75,000 income in retirement, they're already doing the math wrong. You're not replacing $75,000. You're replacing the life that $75,000 bought, which, after taxes, FICA, and work expenses, might have actually felt like $45,000 or $50,000 in real purchasing power. That's not a small distinction. That's the difference between thinking you're behind and realizing you might already be close. I've been close to this mistake myself, building projections based on gross income instead of what people actually spent. The number looks scarier than the reality. Now, the second thing people consistently undervalue, Social Security. Most people treat it like a small monthly check, a supplement, something to help cover groceries while the real retirement money comes from savings. That framing is costing them years of unnecessary work. Here's a different way to look at it. According to the Social Security Administration, the average married couple retiring today receives around $4,100 a month combined. That's roughly $49,200 a year in guaranteed income, inflation adjusted for life. Now apply the 4% rule, the standard benchmark for how much you can safely withdraw from a portfolio each year without running it down. To generate $49,200 a year using the 4% rule, you would need a portfolio worth $1,230,000. You don't have to save that $1,230,000. The government is providing the equivalent of it, backed by the United States Treasury. I don't have a crystal ball for what inflation looks like 10 years from now. But the math on Social Security doesn't lie. You are walking into retirement carrying the equivalent of a $1,200,000 annuity that most people forget to count. When you add that to your actual savings, the gap between where you are and where you need to be looks very different. So if the work tax disappears, And Social Security is worth more than people realize. Why does the $2,500 budget still feel unstable? Because the plan has a flaw that has nothing to do with how much money you have. It has to do with what happens when the budget is built for two, and then suddenly it has to work for one. Let me walk you through a story that plays out more often than most people want to admit. John and Mary are 68 years old. They did a lot of things right. They paid off the mortgage. They kept their lifestyle modest. Between John's Social Security and Mary's, they bring in $3,000 a month. John's check is $1,800. Mary's is $1,200. Their monthly expenses run about $2,500. Utilities, groceries, home insurance, property taxes, the occasional dinner out. Nothing extravagant. On paper, they have a $500 surplus every month. The plan works. Then at 78, John has a heart attack. He's gone within a week, and the math that held for 10 years falls apart overnight. Here's what the Social Security Administration actually does when a spouse dies. The surviving partner keeps one check, the larger one. The smaller check disappears permanently. No phase out, no partial payment. It's just gone. So Mary's household income drops from $3,000 a month to $1,800. That's a 40% reduction in income overnight. Now look at what happens to her expenses. The mortgage is paid off, so that's not the issue. But home insurance, property taxes, according to data from 2026, both have hit record highs across most of the country. Roof maintenance, lawn care, utilities, none of that gets 40% cheaper because there's one fewer person in the house. A household of one doesn't cost half of a household of two. Most fixed costs drop maybe 10% to 15%, if that. So Mary's expenses settle from $2,500 down to maybe $2,200. But her income is $1,800. She's now $400 short every single month, and she has no way to earn it back. That $400 gap gets filled by whatever savings they had left, which, for a couple who retired comfortably on a tight budget, might not be much. At $400 a month, a $60,000 emergency fund lasts 12 years, but only if nothing else goes wrong. One medical event, one major home repair, one bad year of insurance increases, and that timeline collapses fast. I told a lot of people over the years that paying off the house before retirement was the move, that a debt-free home was the safest foundation you could have. I was not entirely wrong, but I didn't account for what's happened to carry costs in 2025 and 2026. Property taxes up, home insurance up in ways that feel almost punitive in certain states. The house is free and clear, but the cost of simply keeping it is not. A paid-off house is still a fixed cost, and a widow living alone on $1,800 a month may not be able to carry it. This is what I mean when I say the $2,500 plan has a tripwire. It's not that the budget is too high. It's that the budget was designed for a two-income household and nobody stress tested it for one. The $2,500 number assumes both Social Security checks keep arriving. The moment one stops, the architecture of the whole plan shifts. And the painful part is that this isn't rare. It's not an edge case. Women statistically outlive men by an average of 5 to 6 years. The odds that one spouse will spend a significant stretch of retirement alone are not small. They're actually pretty close to certain. Why do so many careful, detail-oriented people miss this? That's not a question about math. That's a question about how the human brain handles certain kinds of information. There's a pattern I've seen so many times it stopped surprising me. A couple sits down to plan their retirement. They're organized. They have spreadsheets. They've thought about travel, about healthcare, about what they want the first year to look like. They've done more homework than most people ever do. And the entire plan is built around we. We will need $2,500 a month. We want to visit the grandkids twice a year. We are comfortable with this level of risk in the portfolio. Nobody in that conversation says, I. Nobody runs the numbers for one person. Not because they're careless. Because the brain quietly refuses to go there. There's a well-documented pattern in behavioral psychology around this. When we imagine future scenarios involving the people closest to us, our minds default to continuity. We picture the future as an extension of the present. Same people, same dynamic, just older. Imagining a future where your spouse is gone doesn't just feel painful. It feels almost grammatically wrong, like a sentence that doesn't parse. So people don't model it. They don't avoid it out of laziness. They avoid it because the brain treats it as information it isn't ready to process. I fell into the same trap. A few years back, I sat down to map out our household retirement picture. Income, withdrawals, projected balances, all the way out to age 90. It was detailed. I was proud of it. Then I looked at what I'd actually built and realized I had assumed, without ever deciding to, that both of us would be present for every single year of that projection. The whole model was built on the quiet fiction that we'd go together. Romantic, maybe. But financially, it was a plan with a structural blind spot the size of a decade. The fix isn't morbid. It doesn't require a long, difficult conversation about death. It requires about 30 minutes and one simple question. If the larger Social Security check disappears tomorrow, does the remaining income cover the fixed costs? That's it. That's the stress test. But most couples never run it. And the cost of skipping that 30-minute conversation isn't felt at 60. It's felt at 80 by the person still alive, alone, trying to figure out how to cover a $400 monthly gap on a fixed income with no good options left. Avoiding one hard conversation at 60 doesn't make it go away. It just transfers the consequences to someone who will have far less ability to absorb them. So what does actually fixing the plan look like? That's where we go next. Let's go back to John and Mary. But this time, they had one extra conversation before John retired. They ran the numbers for one person. That single decision changed everything that came after. There are 3 specific moves that close the widow's gap before it opens. None of them require more savings. None of them require a financial advisor. They require a clear head and about an hour of honest math. Move 1, run the single person stress test. Take your current monthly budget, let's say $2,500. Multiply it by 80%. That gives you roughly $2,000. That's a reasonable estimate of what one person actually needs to maintain the same household after the other is gone. Fixed costs don't drop by half, but they do drop some. Now look at the larger of your 2 Social Security checks, just that one number. If it doesn't cover $2,000 on its own, you have a widow's gap. Write down the exact dollar amount of that gap. That number is what your savings need to be prepared to cover, potentially for 10 to 15 years. For John and Mary, the gap was $200 a month, small enough to close, but they had to see it first. Move 2, protect the big check by waiting. This is the one that makes the most immediate difference, and the one people resist the most. If the higher earner in your household claims Social Security at 62, that check is permanently reduced by as much as 30% compared to waiting until full retirement age. Wait until 70, and it grows by 8% per year past full retirement age, sometimes reaching 124% of the base amount. That larger check is not just income for the person who earned it. It becomes the sole income for whoever survives. Claiming it early to fund a few extra years of travel is a real trade-off. It's not wrong on its own terms, but it's worth being clear-eyed about what you're trading. A few hundred extra dollars a month at 63 could mean a few hundred fewer dollars a month for your spouse at 82 with no way to recover it. In John and Mary's revised plan, John waited until 70. His check came in at $2,200 instead of $1,800. When John passed, Mary inherited $2,200 a month instead of $1,800. That $400 difference meant she covered her expenses without touching savings at all. Move 3, have a housing exit agreement in place. A paid-off house feels like security, and it is while both people are healthy and present. But a 4-bedroom home carrying $800 a month in property taxes, insurance, and maintenance is a different equation for one person on a fixed income. The agreement doesn't have to be a decision made in advance. It just has to be a conversation that's already happened. Something like, if one of us is gone and the other is managing this alone, we've agreed the house goes on the market within 18 months. Proceeds go into the portfolio. The surviving spouse moves somewhere smaller, lower maintenance, lower cost. That agreement made at 65 together with clear heads is worth more than almost any financial product you could buy. Because the alternative is a grieving widow at 80 trying to make a $200,000 decision alone under pressure in a market she may not understand. John and Mary made that agreement. It was uncomfortable for about 20 minutes. Then they went and had dinner and didn't think about it again for years. That's the whole point. One honest conversation, made once, from a position of clarity, so that whoever is left doesn't have to make it from a position of loss. The best retirement plan isn't the one with the most money. It's the one that doesn't fall apart when life changes. Here's what we actually covered today. The $1 million target was never really about you. It was built around an industry that profits from how much you accumulate and how long you stay anxious about it. The median American retiring right now has nowhere near $1 million saved, and most of them are doing fine. The $2,500 budget is real. The math behind it works. The work tax disappears when you stop working. Social Security, properly counted, is worth the equivalent of $1,200,000 in guaranteed lifetime income that you never had to save for. But the plan has one flaw. It was designed for 2 people, and it was never tested for 1. The widow's gap is not a rare outcome. It is a near certainty for most couples, just a question of timing. A 40% drop in income with no corresponding drop in fixed costs is not a manageable inconvenience. For someone at 80 with no earning power and depleted savings, it can be the thing that defines the last decade of their life. 3 moves close that gap. Run the single-person stress test. Protect the larger Social Security check by waiting. Have the housing exit conversation before you need to have it. None of that requires $1 million. It requires clarity. You don't have to be wealthy to retire well. You just have to make sure the plan protects the person you love most, even in the scenario neither of you wants to think about. If this made you think about your own numbers, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you and your spouse ever run the budget for just one person? I'm curious how many people have actually done that math. And if you haven't yet, that's what the next conversation is for. Subscribe so you don't miss it.